Hello, my name is Sam Carr, and today I'll be talking about how stress and mental health affect Native Americans and Americans differently due to the process of selection. Stress and mental health are topics that are commonly talked about in American society today. However, different cultures have different ways of dealing with mental health issues, and this difference can be explained through the process of cultural evolution. According to Kleesner and Turek, cultural evolution is a cultural change explained as a Darwinian evolutionary process, and according to Masudi, culture is socially transmitted information such as beliefs, knowledge, skills, or practices. And if you look over here at the image on the screen, genes and culture can be passed on to offspring in similar ways. Genes are passed to offspring by parents, and culture can be passed to offspring in the same way, along with being passed from societal norms, or offspring being influenced by peers, kin, and non-kin. Cultural evolution, along with biological evolution, can be broken up into four mechanisms, one being natural selection, the second being mutation, third migration, and fourth genetic drift. For this presentation, I'll be focusing on natural selection and how it can lead to differences seen between cultures. According to the Berkeley University of California, there are four tenets of evolution by natural selection. The first being there is a variation between traits. Second, there is differential reproduction. Third, there is heredity. And fourth, the end result of producing more and more offspring. The Berkeley University of California then goes on to give an example of natural selection through beetles. With the beetle example presented by the University of California, variation can be seen here in this first image as the beetles are different colors. One is green and one is brown. Then differential reproduction occurs in the second image as the green beetles are picked off by a predator and the brown beetles are left to reproduce. The beetles that survive in this case, the brown beetles, will pass this trait on to their offspring, which will be passed on for more and more generations to come. In agreement with Berkeley University of California, in an article titled Natural Selection, the National Geographic Society states that individuals in a population are naturally variable, meaning that they are all different in some ways. This variation means that some individuals have traits better suited to the environment than others. So in looking back at the beetles example, again we see that the brown beetles were more suited for this environment compared to the green beetles. Just as natural selection can be used to explain genes and traits and show how they change over time, natural selection can also be used in cultural evolution to explain how cultures differ. Dietz et al. States that the Darwinian approach of natural selection can be applied to any self-replicating code, including culture. Dietz et al. Goes to state that culture is a system of rules that guides, not determines, human action. Or in other words, beliefs and values can be passed on to future generations through the process of natural selection by cultural evolution. So overall, culture, just like genes and traits, can be passed on to future generations or modified if needed to match a generational standard. And as you can see from this table here on the screen, cultural evolution is when behavior or cultural characteristics are passed on to members of a family or societal group between generations, much like on the genetic side of the table, how genes and traits are passed on through heredity information from parent to offspring. Two cultures that have distinct cultural differences are the Native Americans and Americans. Since both these populations live in close vicinity of one another, you may assume that these cultures would rub off on each other, but that does not seem to be the case. One example of differences that can be seen between these two cultures is how they deal with and cope with mental health issues and stress throughout their societies. According to Vegton, 1 in 5 American adults experience mental illness at a certain point in their lives. However, over the years, Americans have taken strides to help raise awareness for mental health issues and mental illness. Americans have gone as far as naming May Mental Health Awareness Month. However, Native Americans view mental health in a very different way. According to Nebelkoff, Native Americans have experienced genocide, forced assimilation, involuntary relocation, and displacement, which has caused them lots of trauma over the years and has led to many mental illnesses throughout generations. However, Native Americans try to identify and maintain traditional beliefs and values while they participate in the contemporary world, so they tend to not follow many of the same coping techniques that the Americans do today. and many of these differences can be explained through the process of natural selection. According to Santori, Native Americans make up 2% of the U.S. population, with 21% of Native Americans lacking health care coverage compared to the 9.4% of Americans today. With this in mind, Native Americans are known to have a high prevalence of mental health issues that are not treated by medical professionals due to lack of accommodations or to the fact that American medicine does not take into account Native American religious beliefs and customs. According to Reynolds, between the years 1880 and 1930, Americans tried to change the values and beliefs of Native Americans with the assimilation and allotment. The goal of this was for the American government to assimilate American Indians into the mainstream of American life by changing their customs, values, beliefs, dress, occupations, languages, religions, and philosophies. This caused many Native Americans to stop trusting Americans, their policies, and most importantly, American medicine. And this, along with past assimilation and displacement, led to intergenerational trauma within Native American society. According to Santori, Native Americans continue to face intergenerational trauma, which is defined as collective, cumulative emotional wounding across generations resulting from events affecting whole communities. And when looking at cultural evolution through the view of natural selection, we see that this trauma is passed from generation to generation, and this trauma was initially caused by loss of land, forced relocation, separation of families when children were sent to boarding schools, and loss of culture. And once again, this is passed on through generations and through the process of natural selection, and this was also passed on through storytelling by the elders in the Native American communities. From all this trauma, Native Americans have turned toward religious and sacred practices on how to deal with stress and mental illness. One way how Native Americans deal with stress is through silence. Silence is a really big part of Native American culture, and according to Brown and Cousins, Native Americans recognize that in silence there are profound modes of sacred, humanizing communication. So during times of stress, Native Americans tend to fall back on their religious beliefs, such as silence, that are passed on to them by their parents and grandparents. And according to Brown and Cousins, elders are fully linked to life of the tribe through their role as transmitters. They have the very significant task of passing on knowledge to young people. So overall, many of these beliefs on how to deal with stress are passed on through Native American ancestors. So Native Americans do not really rely on the American style of healing, which tends to be through medicine. Many of this knowledge that is passed on from elders to the younger generation are religious customs on how to deal with stress, such as different ceremonies and traditional customs for healing, as Reynolds mentions here, that Native Americans tend to reestablish traditional customs, ceremonies, values, and beliefs for the purpose of healing and wellness. Reynolds et al. Also brings up the point on how incorporating Natives' religious beliefs into mental health prescriptions or therapies may cause Natives to feel more welcomed in American healthcare. As Reynolds states, Natives' values and beliefs are essential to the wellness of these groups and should be incorporated into the healthcare system. Overall, all these customs and beliefs are passed on to future generations through selection in the process of cultural evolution, and is why Native American culture is so much different than American culture is today. So when we talk about American culture, over the years, Americans have been trying to reduce the negative stigma surrounding mental health and mental illness. Many Americans seek a medical professional's help when it comes to mental health rather than falling back on religion like the Native Americans do. According to Saha et al., 1 in 6 Americans take psychiatric medications and seek medical help to help with mood, psychotic, and anxiety disorders. And according to Gloria and Steinhardt, they mention how adult Americans who work a lot tend to deal with chronic exposure to high levels of stress, which cause them to rely on medicine and therapy for help. It's also attend therapy where they learn cognitive behavioral coping strategies focused on identifying and changing the maladaptive maladaptive thinking and behavior that create stress. So instead of relying on religion, most Americans tend to rely on medicine. As you have seen, Americans tend to rely on medicine and therapy when dealing with mental health issues. But the question comes up of how does natural selection play in this? The answer to this question is that children in America are pushed at a very young age to shoot for their dreams and to dream big. And many kids take this and they start thinking that they can become vets, police officers, lawyers, firefighters, and most importantly, doctors. This idea of becoming a doctor is most likely given to the children through the parents and grandparents, especially if the child's family is in the medical field. And I personally can relate to this because many of my aunts, uncles, grandparents, and parents are in the medical field, and they, at a very young age, they pushed me, my siblings, and my cousins to join the medical field, and now many of us are pursuing that career. And according to Parmley, most doctors want their children to follow in their footsteps, as it is a working environment far superior to that of many other professions. These children are being fed ideas of working in the medical field over many generations, much like how Native American ancestors were telling them to focus on religious beliefs. So if becoming a doctor runs in a family, the children are more likely to turn to doctors when they are in need of assistance, such as needing therapy and prescriptions for mental illnesses. These children are taught through selection to trust medicine and everything it has to offer, so it makes sense that most people turn to medical professions when they're struggling in the American society. So when looking at both cultures together, we can see how cultural evolution comes into play with the mechanism of natural selection. Natural selection is actually a good way of explaining the reasoning behind these cultural differences. And when talking about cultural evolution, I mentioned earlier how there are 4 mechanisms of cultural evolution. And out of those 4, some researchers may argue that migration is taking place instead of natural selection. And that is why there could be cultural differences. However, as you have seen from this presentation, that does not seem to be the case. For migration to occur, Europeans traveling to America would have had to develop more Native American beliefs, or the Native Americans would have to take in some of the beliefs of the Europeans once they got here. But that did not seem to happen. And this was not the case, meaning that the only logical mechanism that could have taken place is natural selection. Through natural selection, the cultural beliefs and values were passed down from generation to generation in each population separately, and no cultural values or beliefs were changed by the other. The ability of both of these cultures to maintain their beliefs while living in close proximity of each other ties into the mechanism of natural selection. Overall, this goes to show how cultural evolution can be used as a way to explain differences seen between cultures and give people a better understanding of how different populations of individuals are so different. And from this presentation, I hope that you all take away how relevant cultural evolution is in our society today. And I want you guys to ask yourself the question, how can you see cultural evolution in your own cultural values and beliefs today? Here are my references. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.